this to feel conversational, so if you have something that you just can't hold back and you want to shout out during the presentation, just let me know. Raise your hand and we'll stop and talk. I have lots of images tonight to cover history and architecture and innovation and the culture of Boulder, and it's all going to be wrapped up coming out of the influence of the federal labs. So first of all, anybody here have worked for any of the federal labs, whether it's NOAA, NIST, NCAR, UCAR, right, Mary? Thank you for your amazing service in helping to make Boulder into this innovative hotbed of America. So thank you for that. And my conversation tonight is going to focus on 3 institutions that have started as startups. Think about these as startups in this town. The Bureau of Standards, known as NIST, of course NCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research, founded in 1960, NOAA, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the David Skaggs building here. And the reputation of Boulder is well known, and different magazines have talked about Boulder being 25 square miles surrounded by reality. And when people talk about that, so Boulder, it's actually a compliment, because Boulder is so great as a community, as a place to live, as a place to work, and an influential place. And that progressive spirit runs through the town. So these are images of people who were involved in the health food world. Steve Demos from White Wave, and Mo Segel, no relation. I call him my cousin, but he's no relation. And then the people who started Alfalfas and Wild Oats. And this Carnival Cafe in the very bottom was part of the whole hippie culture that came about in part because of the federal labs in town, and I'll explain that. The progressive spirit of Boulder in fitness and athletics, and we have Olympians in this town, and you can start seeing who some of them are. Connie Carpenter and Frank Shorter, and actually a shameless plug in the bottom right is my wife and her sister, who work in innovative physical Pilates work. Education, of course, we have the University of Colorado, Boulder Valley School District, Naroba, all very innovative in their own ways. And you'll begin to see in these images that many of the buildings that these categories are showing are modern buildings, are contemporary buildings. The progressive spirit of Boulder with its culture, the band shell, Tulagi's on the hill, the Museum of Boulder, which was the Masonic Temple. And how can you hear me okay in the back? Okay, good. And then the Boulder Theater that Historic Boulder has been involved with for quite a long time to get it restored. The counterculture in Boulder came about because of the flowering of education in this community. And that continues to this very day. And it goes back to the hippie days in the 60s and even in the 50s. And then religious exploration in this town. We have a very strong Buddhist community. There's Star House up above Flagstaff, and or up Sunshine Canyon, and others. And then government planning, even Boulder is very innovative. The top left is the very first days of the Pearl Street Mall, when it was grass instead of brick. You have the green ring of open space surrounding town, 47,000 acres, which I believe is twice as much as Colorado Springs, and Colorado Springs has twice as many people. So we have got lots of open space. Height limits, so looking out over downtown, you don't see anything that's going to seriously block your view of the foothills. And it's really hard to see in the bottom left image, the blue line along the edges of Boulder. And that is going to have a part of the conversation about NCAR. Well, stay tuned on that one. Technology, so IBM in the top left came to town. some of the people from IBM moved to create storage tech, and then that allowed and influenced companies like Zio and Google to come to town. And of course, the scientists. Aerospace exploration goes well beyond the 20 astronauts that have come from CU, 20 astronauts from CU, and the bioengineering and quantum computing, that this town is becoming like the Silicon Valley of quantum computing. And these four guys walking across the street like the Beatles walking across Abbey Road, they're Nobel Prize winners. And they're just, it's just a great image. So this is really the crux of my presentation. That's Winston Churchill. He had this great saying, but I taught at the University of Colorado, and one thing that we in the College of Architecture and Environmental Design wanted to make sure our students knew that the places that you design can consciously and subconsciously influence the lives of the people who inhabit those spaces, whether it's a room like this, a beautiful chapel with great elegant decor, a feeling more of a communal space instead of an individual scaled space, and the stained glass windows add kind of a religiosity. Of course, this was a chapel, but modernism and the modern architecture that the federal labs adopted as the direction for their buildings influenced the next 2 to 3 generations of architecture in the community. Why is this such a hot topic? It's because the federal government, and particularly the executive branch, is cutting back the funding for all the sciences in town, in part, and maybe in large part, I don't want to get too political, in part because the science that is being developed at these laboratories has quite a bit to do with the science of climate change. And climate change has become a campaign slogan instead of education, science, logic, and reason. And so all these laboratories have been undercut, and NCAR is the one that's the most in the crosshairs right now. And we can talk further about that later, but I have miles to go before the end here. So, but Boulder didn't start out a progressive place. It was like a regular sort of town. If you kind of compare Boulder to Longmont, Longmont is what Boulder would have been if we didn't have the federal labs. A more conservative place with a main street, Pearl Street. It had an edifice that was a neo-traditional style courthouse, replaced by an avant-garde style courthouse that we have on Pearl Street now. We had old-fashioned neighborhoods, Whittier, Uni Hill, Mapleton, with conservatively designed buildings, neo-traditional, looking backwards instead of looking forwards, to try to make Boulder feel like it was a more established place than a dusty western town. And the university did the same. They built quadrangles, traditional buildings. The very first buildings were almost East Coast style buildings, and then Charles Clowder, the architect from Philadelphia, came here and decided the style should be something slightly different, but traditional, neo-traditional Italian, kind of a Renaissance Italian style. And you can see here's the 1950s bobby socks, saddle shoes on a traditional looking CU campus with very few trees because it was brand new, but the buildings looked like they had been there for 100 years, maybe 200 years. So the Boulder Labs, they came to town, and the Bureau of Standards is the very first one that came to town. And it started in Washington, D.C. in the early part of the 20th century. And what happened though was when Harry Truman went to Europe to meet with Churchill and Stalin during the war after FDR died, he saw whole capital cities laid to waste. And he had just pushed the button on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And he was afraid that Russia was going to start a Cold War and bomb our capital cities, including Washington, D.C., where the primary location where most of our scientists were located. And so he came up with the idea of moving a lot of our sciences out of the East Coast, away from the ocean where submarines couldn't attack very easily, and Boulder became a location because, for these reasons, the National Bureau of Standards was really interested in radio frequency exploration, and a lot of it had to do with military reasons, because they wanted to be able to wage battles with better communications. And Boulder already had a National Guard armory doing that study in the north side of town. There was really good radio silence because there weren't very many people here in town. There was practically nothing except farms between here and Denver. There was a university here, and the town donated the land, 217 acres. So this is the pre-location. This was an armory, and it's now a landmark and been redeveloped into a housing development on the north side of town. This is Dwight Eisenhower with the two architects, Luckman and Pereira. Eisenhower also was influential in picking Boulder. He and his wife Mamie had vacationed here a number of times. She actually grew up coming out here from, was it Kansas? Abilene, Kansas maybe, where she was from. And they used to go to El Dorado Springs, to the resort there. They'd see Glenn Miller perform and take the springs. But these architects won a competition to design the location for the Bureau of Standards. And this is some of their work that they had done before and after the Bureau of Standards kind of put them on the map. And you can see the Transamerica Tower, but the building on the right is the airport in Los Angeles, central building. So this is the very first layout for the Bureau of Standards. And there's a little image on the right of an antenna. So architects like to diagram, and look at what's the idea. So the central spine of this building is just like the tower and the antenna with the branches spanning off. But it was also primarily laid out and slightly at an angle to Broadway to capture the best daylight, free light to get into the labs. And that's why they were laid out in that regard. The front of the building is more ceremonial, the meeting hall and the lobby space, and that's what you're seeing in this image. But it's done in a modernist sensibility. They use concrete, raw concrete, which was something that the Europeans had been experimenting with, and it came to this country as a cheap material. But then they brought in some little bit of the local sandstone to warm it up. And the building actually looks a little bit like a battleship from this point, with a conning tower, and the sunshades over the windows on the sides that are harder. That's the sides facing south, so anyway. And what goes on there? So they, among lots of advanced research in particle physics and the atomic clock, the world's most accurate timepiece, has been there since it opened in 1954, right around that time period. And to this day, they keep advancing the accuracy of that clock. But then quantum computing is being studied here as well and developed. And what these scientists found when they came to the university, and I've read this, it's not something that I'm making up, is that the university was pretty sleepy when it came to the sciences. And the scientists wanted graduates to come work for them. So they started teaching at the university, because the university didn't have such a good physics department. And so by having these scientists here, it improved the caliber of the academics at the university. And now look at CU. It has, for a publicly funded university, which is kind of a debate, because I think they only get about 5% of their funding from the state. But as a public university, it has really great science departments now. And this is directly attributable to the Bureau of Standards coming to town and these scientists coming here. So NCAR comes to town. And this is a fun image. On the top left is the director of NCAR, Walter Roberts, and his wife Janet Roberts, they initially had an observatory above Climax, Colorado, above Leadville. And I believe he drove the telescope out in his station wagon from MIT. Pardon?
Was it convertible?
It was a convertible, yes. So, yeah, and then there was a great story. Mrs. Roberts wrote to Betty Crocker and said, can you help me to bake bread and things for my family, my kids, at 11,000 feet? And they said, nobody lives at 11,000 feet. They said, I'm nobody. So then they came to town. They built this house. It was a single rectangular building. Then they extended an L shape to it, and they ended up hiring an architect named Titian Papacristo to help finish the design and the construction of the project. And Titian Papacristo then became Walter Roberts' kind of advisor, architectural advisor on the project, with this lady right here, Mary, was very involved. She was employee number 2 at NCAR, and hi, thank you for coming. And there was a competition, and they first had to figure out where they were going to build it, and they chose the mesa, the table mesa, and I read that he thought of it as an acropolis of science, and he thought about it as Caltech on the mesa. And but his wife was involved with League of Women Voters and the planning board, and she was very involved in the blue line to prevent development in the foothills above Boulder. So can you imagine their dinner conversations where the husband wanted to have this building, this campus up above the blue line, and they had to have a special vote in the population, and the voters allowed the development to happen there. They did hire I.M. Pei. I.M. Pei had been working for a developer as the in-house architect in New York, and among the things he developed were the ones bookending on either side. Those were projects he did for William Zeckendorf, the developer, and that was the Mile High Center in Denver. And in the middle was his very first building on his own. It was a science lab at MIT. Then he came to Boulder, and he was trying to figure out what is the precedent for designing a building in this site. He had never designed anything outside of an urban area. I.M. Pei was the son of the president of the Bank of China. He was a pretty wealthy guy. He showed up in wingtip shoes, 3-piece suit, and Walter Roberts was in his hiking shoes and jeans, and he said, let's go up to the mesa. And he said, okay, your car or mine? He said, we're walking. And so he walked, I hiked up, and I.M. Pei had written that it was one of the most thrilling days of his life to go outside of his comfort zone, to be in a rural setting, a spectacular backdrop, and he was trying to figure out what's the precedent for this. And so he looked at ancient buildings like these, and he also looked at modern buildings. And in fact, the one in the middle is the one that he said had the most influence. It was a building at University of Pennsylvania, the Richards Laboratory, designed by Louis Kahn, who also designed the Salk Institute in La Jolla. And I.M. Pei's favorite architect was Le Corbusier, who designed this building and you begin to see these concrete hooded elements. And so the very first design was this is the second design. The first design was kind of scary. It was a series of towers on top of the mesa. And I was just told beforehand that Mr. Roberts didn't like to ruffle feathers, but he wanted to tell I.M. Pei to go back to the drawing board. So he sent Mary to New York to tell Mr. Pei to start over. Yeah. And the original design, the second design had 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 towers. The one on the far left was not built because they ran out of money. It came in over budget, surprise, surprise. The story of an architect's life, right? And there they are, Ian Pei and Walter Roberts. They had a really great relationship. Mr. Roberts would stay at Ian Pei's house or apartment in New York when he would go to visit. Lifelong friends. And the architecture that's so modern is not only the abstracted cubic volumes, but the use of concrete, and not just gray concrete like was done at the Bureau standards, but a colored concrete made with the color of the stone of the sandstone in backdrop. And the other thing about this set of kind of modernism is the indoors just expands right to the outdoors. There's not, the walls disappear between outside and inside. The walls extend from inside to outside, the concrete walls. And another thing about it is, and if you think about the Alhambra Palace with the fountains in the middle, originally there was a really beautiful abstract cubist fountain in the middle of the courtyard that was a danger zone for people in actuality, because the water didn't want to stay in the fountain because the wind blew so much, and so they changed it. There's also a rooftop garden on the building, and I'm talking too much because I have a lot more to go. So, and what they do there is atmospheric science, and they had, outside of the Pentagon, they had the world's fastest computer there. So it's just an amazing. Nowadays, even in Colorado, don't you think weather's prediction is pretty accurate these days? It's pretty incredible. So, National Center for Atmospheric Research. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the David Skaggs building, that building opened in 1998. The diagram of the building is a train. And if you think of the building, it's a really long building, but it's broken into like train cars, and then there's a coupling between the cars, and the coupling is a series of glass and metal towers between the concrete and the stone. And the architects for this were the same who designed DIA and the Convention Center, Fentress Bradford. So here you see one of those couplings between the two important parts of the building. And here you see that again. And then you can see some of what they do. They doing research in oceans and atmosphere as well. So, as I said, the influence of these buildings and these institutions and these people couldn't have been stronger. And I'm going to jump quickly through lots of images of new of buildings and groups that came about because of them. This is the core group who founded Ball Aerospace, starting with university students, and then it became this large research development. Most recently, the James Webb telescope was developed here and put up in space from that point. The building on the right was torn down recently, and every one of those laboratory buildings, except for the bottom one, is going to be torn down because they're planning to put up a parking lot for a bigger building in the back. So it's a little sad. This is the Beach Aircraft Aerospace. So Beach decided we're not going to only make little airplanes, but we're going to explore rockets. And there's actually tanks of rocket fuel to this day buried near this site in north between Boulder and Lyons. IBM came to town and had a huge influence for 50 years, spinning off groups like Storage Tech. And even then, the university got into the game of designing buildings that were more modern, more expressive of the ideas that were going on in the classroom with the sciences. So this is the Engineering Center, and the Williams Village Towers, very abstract towers, and the Pyramidal Building, unfortunately, was torn down a few years ago. The Joint Institute for Laboratory Astrophysics Department, it's a huge building complex, and has been renovated to bring it up to the highest standards of science to this day. The geodesic dome that Bucky Fuller designed or is credited for inventing is used here at the planetarium on campus. And then you start to see non-science buildings, office buildings. And this is our short skyscraper. This is our short building that maybe Mies van der Rohe could have designed. All glass and steel. And this building broke the camel's back, though. This is the one that made the city put on height restrictions because they didn't want to have downtown be torn down and have it be replaced by buildings, one after another, skyscrapers. And for this, I'd say this building is responsible for the Pearl Street Mall, because if the height restriction hadn't been put into place, all those buildings would have been torn down. This is a really beautiful office building that an architect designed, and the same architect, Roger Easton, designed this. It was a sales center for IBM, an office building in town. This was Hobart Wagner's own office building. It's almost like a Mondrian type array of wooden columns, and it didn't do very well because it sat over the pond, a retaining pond. So you can imagine the water and the wood. Not a great idea, but a beautiful little building. Modern, abstract, asymmetrical buildings downtown. This is the Geological Society of America building, and what's exciting about it in terms of preservation, it's going to be adaptively reused for affordable housing in North Boulder. And even our Boulder Chamber of Commerce is in a very modernistic building. And then progressive religious buildings. So this is a super cool A-frame building like you've never seen before. Hobart Wagner thought, let's do something expanded on that notion. And he also did this addition to the United Methodist Church. It has beautiful stained glass inside. And this is that first Christian church on the entrance to Boulder. It's almost like a billboard to Boulder that keep Boulder innovative, right? Not weird, keep Boulder innovative. And even our city hall, the building on the right is by the famous architect from Paris, Le Corbusier. And look at the relationship, how similar they are, the shape of the buildings. It was showing that even in Boulder, which was a small town, kind of a backwater, the architects were looking at what was going on in the rest of the world. So, and that was because there were scientists here who were their friends, who were from Europe, who were from South America, who were from the Orient. Probably not a politically correct word to say anymore. Boulder Public Library, a modernist building. Another civic building, the courthouse building by Hobart Wagner. And a building that's likely to be torn down, the South Boulder Rec Center, which is like a Frank Lloyd Wright style building that has a leaky swimming pool, so they decided they want to tear the whole building down. Anyway, there's more to it than that, but Historic Boulder would certainly like to see the building adaptively reused and then expanded. And then apartment buildings, modernist apartment buildings, again, Roger Easton. This is a Tish and Papa Cristo design building that is right there on Broadway and 17th Street. Nearby is this building by Hobart Wagner. It's going to be torn down for more apartments. And here's a high-rise apartment building. And look, senior living. You know, when you think about senior living, you think about, right, comfortable, traditional styles, but Boulder went for modern buildings with big areas of glass and take advantage of the views. So you see these for Golden West and Presbyterian Manor. And look at this. This is Fraser Meadows when it was first finished, looking across the lake. I mean, it's kind of a romantic view across the lake, you know, reflected, but super modern, super efficient, lots of daylight. Even the banks, they didn't have columns and pediments. They had egg crate shapes and vaulted slabs of concrete. This one torn down, the National State Bank. This building, we're happy that Historic Boulder got involved to get this Midland Savings Bank landmarked. And it looks like it's going to be repurposed, possibly for an expansion of the farmer's market for a year-round market. Medical buildings, traditional buildings. This is the Boulder Medical Center, the Boulder Community Hospital, before it was expanded on modern. This was the Mapleton Memorial Hospital, which was torn down to make way for the other academy. And then look at this crazy modern building. This was a dental office, and across the street was an eye clinic. And this was designed by, I think, Boulder's greatest homegrown architect, Charles Hartling, most inventive architect. And Baseline Junior High School award-winning innovative design by James Hunter, torn down this past 2 years. We have 2 buildings by Hobart Wagner's firm in South Boulder, Fairview, and Southern Hills. So you can see that modernism is permeating all these different building types, and students are being indoctrinated from an early time period, early age, of being in modern buildings with glass and steel and concrete and innovative layouts inside to maximize the latest ideas on education. Fairview, very few windows, almost no walls. There was pods of classrooms. It was very popular in the 70s to do those experimental types of education. Here's another really interesting use of a roof to create a way to get light into the gym without glare. And unfortunately torn down. Another building torn down, the Harvest House Hotel, international style with balconies running along, kind of like a Miami beach style building or a Bauhaus Germany style building. And then residences. So Martin Acres came about because NIST came to town. So that whole development was responsible because those federal labs came here. And modern residences were not just tract homes, they were individual design works of sculpture. And you see that here, again, by Charles Hartling, 3 different examples from a more kind of traditional style on the right to maybe some really incredible sculptural type on the left with inventive materials. Here's another design by Titian Papacristo that was recently made, acknowledged as a landmark in the community. And Betty Woodman, the famous potter, lived in the house and built a potting studio in the back. Here's a Carl Worthington design. He was responsible for the Denver Tech Center layout. And just last few slides, Boulder has become known now as a place for international innovation. And you're starting to see that at the university going into that wholeheartedly. The Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics, the Carruthers Bioscience Building on East Campus, the Sneed Aerospace Engineering Building on East Campus, all very contemporary. You wouldn't see that on Central Campus. It's talking about the 21st century and beyond. And then Google and Trimble coming to town doing contemporary designs. And now the architecture for quantum sciences being developed in the community. And you see that here and here. Even our newest library, the North Boulder Library, really interesting. It has a green roof, grass, or plants growing on it. It's just really incredible design. And again, housing, townhomes, and single-family homes. So, the impacts, what the federal labs have done for Boulder is brought highly educated people from all over the world to be here, influenced CU to develop their colleges of science, spun off private sector science businesses, and modernism has in some ways become a preferred design approach to buildings, and all that has led to Boulder becoming a creative, innovative hub. So, to conclude, speaking for Historic Boulder, we are working right now on trying to create roadblocks to stop the closure of NCAR, NOAA, and NIST. We're in conversation with our legislators directly and trying to make sure that these buildings and these people and these scientific research centers have life beyond the midterm elections. So it's a way to say, get out and vote, and let's try to hold back the pressure to close these institutions. And one of the things that we're doing, particularly with NCARs, we're looking to nominate it on the National Register of Historic Places. And we believe by elevating it to that level, it will draw more attention to not just the architecture, but the importance of what it represents in the research that goes on here and supporting science. And so if you're motivated, reach out to Tim or Melanie in the back. They're involved with leading Historic Boulder, and get involved and just spread the word. Thank you, and I entertain questions.
I recently saw that Joe Goose got some money awarded for NOAA, $3 or $4 million. Do you know anything about that? Do you know if we're making progress there?
I don't specifically know. While I've talked to Mr. Nagoose and we've talked to his administrators, we don't know. We know he's incredibly effective, and we're really lucky to have him as our legislator. But I don't have any inside information more about how we can get more money for these labs. We have talked about the idea of doing kind of an activity at NCAR to try to point some publicity in this direction, but we've been warned off from doing something because there's a concern that the ICE organization might turn up the screws on Boulder. So right now, we're just trying to work behind the scenes. We've been talking to UCAR and their attorney before they filed a lawsuit to prevent the closure of NCAR by the National Science Foundation. And one thing that Tim Plass found out when he was doing research was that only the National Science Foundation, UCAR, and NCAR can operate on the lab, on the Mesa, based on the election that the population voted. So they can't turn it into a casino hotel or a resort. And the National Science Foundation, however, could change the use of that space. So we know that CU and the Chancellor have come up with a consortium of universities that have offered to take over the operation of NCAR if there's no other way to save the operation of it. That was a long answer to your question. Sorry. And other questions? Yeah.
I heard that the computers from NCAR are being sent to Wyoming, to the University of Wyoming. Is that true?
No, that's not true. What's true is that maybe 10 years ago, there was a competition to build the new computers for NCAR, and Wyoming won. So Wyoming has the computers, I think in Laramie.
No.
Cheyenne.
It's just a little bit south of Cheyenne.
A little south of Cheyenne. Thanks. And so those amazing computers, the Cray computers, are now dust and museum quality, gathering dust, but the ones in Wyoming are there. And yeah, there's a conversation about turning those to a different use than predicting weather and climate. And so that's also as a part of the mix of what's going on with NCAR.
Being a New Yorker coming to the West, I was anticipating there would be some snow. And you see what's happened, everything was completely reversed. The entire East Coast, for the first time, was frozen. Well, starting in Florida, going up to Maine, where I went to college. And why is the government saying that this is not an important thing to understand? Because the world could be turning itself backwards, and you're taking
I agree. Somebody who's a scientist probably can answer that better.
Yeah, so I want to introduce myself. I got my PhD in astrophysics from CU back in 1982, and I worked up on the MESA lab, supported by a graduate research assistant program. And I love to tell them, I actually take my grandkids up there. I'm just visiting for a few days. I live in Pennsylvania. And my son lives right around the corner from here, so I take my kids up there to show them the lab and everything. But when I do, I point out that in the southeast tower, you see back then, the way that building is, it's such a weird building for using, because there's all these nooks and crannies. Anyway, the top building of the southeast tower is on the top, where that sort of flat thing is. You can't really put individual senior scientists' office up there because they can't get the ventilation and stuff. So they put all the support scientists and graduate students up there. So I had an office on that top floor that was called a penthouse, and overlooking the 360 degrees. And I did my thesis there. So one day I'm sitting there watching the beautiful, clouds roll in, and I'm sitting there, and the clouds are getting darker and darker. And all of a sudden, there was the loudest sound I ever heard. It was definitely a thunder strike, and it hit the corner of on the northeast corner of the southeast tower where I was sitting. Literally, the distance between me and that window, a chunk of the building fell down on the ledge right in front of me. And so I was scared shitless. And I ended up volunteering to take a small cubby office downstairs so I could finish my thesis. But when I take my grandchildren up there, I point to that corner, and you can see how it's patched. And it's patched with a rock that was basically the size of so a large boulder fell down on the ledge. And so I kind of think of it like sort of Back to the Future, the clock tower getting hit by lightning. I was there at the moment when that corner of the building was hit by lightning. Anyway.
Great story. And I'm originally from Pennsylvania too, so hey, go Pirates. Somebody, yeah.
I'd just like to say that Walter Moore Roberts was a beautiful person, and he would open his home playing music, and it was open to the public. And many people came by for years and years. And in the end, ironically, he died from melanoma, which he probably acquired at that high lab where he was working originally.
Yeah, I've heard great stories about Mr. Roberts and Mrs. Roberts. I had the privilege to meet at her home, and she was a force of nature as well for this town, and did some tremendously great, innovative things for the community, almost on par, maybe on par with what her husband was doing in the science world. Any other questions? Happy to. Okay. Thank you very much again for making some time out of your evening to come over. And if you have any questions or you want to talk to me afterwards, I'm happy to chat for a while. Thanks, everybody.